In the last red light of a Kentucky evening, the woods closed in as if the trees themselves wanted to keep what they had seen. A wagon groaned along a rutted trace, horses blowing white in the cooling air, a family counting miles in whispers. The father kept a long rifle across his knees. The mother kept a hand on the cradle board beside the flour sack. They were still a day's travel from the next cabin post and felt it. Somewhere behind them, a whippoorwill called, and another voice answered from the dark, too flat, too quick. Out of the timber came two riders. Men on that road read faces the way rivermen read water. The big one let the reins hang and smiled without warmth. The smaller man sat easier in the saddle, eyes quick and cold. Their horses were lean. They said they were brothers. Others later said they were cousins who shared a name and worse habits. Both looked like men who had followed the war to its muddy edges and never found their way back. One called himself Micajah, though everyone came to know him as Big Harpe. The other was Wiley, Little Harpe. Their names would run ahead of them like brush fire, but not fast enough for those who met them first. They asked if the road was clear, admired the baby and the rifle and the horses, then asked for the rifle and the horses. The father set his jaw. The smaller one slid from the saddle. The mother clutched the cradle board. Stories of the frontier wear a hard shine, but nothing was fine about what the Harpes did. They were not outlaws with a code. They were not brothers in any way that earned respect. They cut across Kentucky and the Cumberland and down into the bends of the Natchez Trace like a saw blade, leaving fresh marks. Travelers disappeared. Cabin doors were kicked in. Campfires burned out. When bodies were found, the work was cruel and needless. Crushed skulls, slashed throats, bellies waited for the river. Some counted 20 dead, others 30, still others more. The ground kept its own ledger and did not talk. The women who rode with them, 2 sisters and another who called herself Sally, said later the men did not sleep easy and did not forgive waking. They took what they wanted from cabins and people. They wore stolen hats and muskets and lied about their names. They looked like teamsters one day and hunters the next day. In a country where everyone carried a knife, they were a worse kind of common. The Harpes were not clever planners, but the land favored men who moved fast and slept light. Creeks cut new channels, trails braided and faded. A man could ride 50 miles and never see a lawman. If a posse formed at daybreak, by sundown it lagged behind. Recognized, they left the trail, climbed through laurel and rock, and hid in cane brakes and caves. Their worst work lived in stories that spread from fire to fire. A peddler found face down in a creek with stones sewn into his coat. A tavern keeper beaten for his till. A child thrown against a wall for crying. A man named Dooley waylaid near the Red River and not seen again until spring thaw gave his bones back. No one could square killing like that with hunger or need. Then came the woman who ran. She had carried messages for them and worse. Barefoot through cane, dress torn, she reached a settlement where men kept horses saddled and rifles near. She spoke the name Harpe. Word went up and down the rivers, run them to ground. Among them was Moses Stiegel, a farmer used to weather and loss. The Harpes had slept in his cabin and left a mark that would not scrub out. He rode with men who knew every creek between the Green and the Tennessee. The chase ran hard through the summer of 1799. Tracks lost in rock showed in mud. Twice a camp still warm, once a shallow grave. On the Red River, they heard a horse blow and a voice call. Big Harpe ran first, firing backward, shouting he would never be taken. Little Harpe wheeled into timber. A ball struck Big Harpe's horse. He leapt down and ran for brush, but men who had plowed can run. Stiegel brought him down with a shot. Bleeding, he kept cursing. He named nothing. On that riverbank, the frontier showed its hardest face to its own. The men took Big Harpe's head. They were not proud, but they were sure why. They set it on a pole at a crossroads as a warning to men who might think the woods were theirs to hunt. For years, travelers spoke of Harpe's Head as a place you did not linger. Little Harpe kept riding, circling south toward the Mississippi. He fell in with river thieves at Cave in Rock. On a bluff above the Ohio, a man named Mason ran a gang with false flags. When the law squeezed and the gang broke, he killed Mason and carried the head to claim a reward. The Rangers paid him in irons. In 1804, he swung in the Mississippi Territory. They did not take scalps or trophies. They took time and safety from every mile. People slept lighter. Ferries crossed with rifles by the tiller. Preachers kept pistols in saddlebags. Even the bravest watched the brush. Some said this is what happens when war leaves its tools and men keep using them. Others said there was no explaining it. You cannot track a heart the way you track a horse. Either way, fires burned out on their own, and names were spoken in low voices. In one camp, a boot print showed a split heel mended with wire. In another, a torn scrap of dress snagged on a hedge. A boy found a knife stuck in a walnut tree and kept it until his father threw it in the river. Every trace felt like proof. None held them still. The posse that ran them in 1799 were farmers and teamsters and a blacksmith with forged scars. They had lost hogs, oats, sleep, and cousins. They had lost the sense that a road at dusk was only a road. They wanted that back more than money. After Big Harpe fell and the pole went up, some said it should have been done sooner, and some could not look at all. Children asked whose head it was, and mothers told a story about wolves that walk on two legs. Travelers lifted their hats and rode on. South along the rivers, Little Harpe took on new names, but violence has a scent. Boatmen on the Ohio learned to read Cave in Rock, and many judged wrong that day. A skiff waving fresh water could mean a rope and a knife. The river kept those secrets. The trail they left runs through cabins where women slept with knives under pillows and down traces where men looked twice at riders. Parents told children not to call into the dark. The frontier loved a clean finish. The Harpes left stains. In taverns long after, men argued the number, 20, 30, 50. Counting did not make nights shorter. Some said the times made the men mean. Others said the men made the times worse. Either way, the lesson traveled. The land was big enough for hope, and for men who tried to be the only law they needed. Such riders needed stopping, and they were. On winter roads, years later, a father would push his wagon through mud and think of those names, hand on the rifle. His wife would hush the baby and listen for calls that might be birds and might be men. The wheels would turn. The stories would ride along, lighter than a hat, heavier than a stone. If there is any comfort, it is that neighbors found their way to each other when it mattered. Men who could barely agree on a fence line agreed on a hunt. And when travelers passed the pole at the crossroads and looked away, they were promising the living the road would not be given up. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.